In terms of the infrastructure and the internet, when we talk about the primary mission or the charter for IEIC, to kind of sum it up, it's to utilize innovation influence within the IEIC's collective participants, which includes the founding members, which really includes all of you as well as part of the community, and stimulate economic development and growth in communities around the world. We started with Henrico. Our plan is to expand this globally, and Vint has been a key proponent of that, in terms of supporting IEIC. And Vint Cerf, personally for me, it's been an honor. This is the second time in my career to work with Vint. The first time around was MCI. It was for a brief period of time when I went through a number of different acquisitions from UUNet through Digex, worked with Sheila there, and then MCI, WorldCom, Verizon Business, Verizon, but I had the good fortune of working with Vint. And now again with IEIC, it's been an absolute honor. And Vint has been a key proponent, and also when I tell people about in general about the essence of what Vint Cerf stands for, I just explain it in a simple way. When you pick up a telephone, call someone and have a phone call, that's a circuit switching network. You've engaged the entire circuit. When you pick up your device, send an email to someone, that's a packet switching network. Your email is broken into hundreds and hundreds of small packets. It goes across the Atlantic, it goes across the Pacific, wherever it needs to go to get to the final destination. Those packets magically come together. Oh, and by the way, in a matter of milliseconds, the end user sees that email, reads his take action. Hopefully they take action quick enough. And that happens magically. It's no magic. That's the protocol, the TCP/IP protocol that Vint Cerf wrote over 50 years ago. And it gives me great honor to recognize Vint and to invite him on the stage as the chairman of IEIC for his keynote remarks. Vint, over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. You noticed that Vinay got the memo, three-piece suits. I don't know about the rest of you there.
And Evo as well.
So, yes, thank you. Also true. So I think we've got at least 3 folks wearing three-piece suits. When I joined Google in 2005, I hoped to increase the sartorial quotient of the company. We now have 180,000 people, and only a couple of them wear three-piece suits. Several preamble things. First of all, I'll add my welcome to you. Thank you for coming today. Second, there's a bunch of Interglobix magazine copies out there. Please take some because they weigh a ton, and we would like to let the staff, not have to carry them back. So take a few home. Also, I noticed that this is called the Global NAP Summit, and I have to admit, for people who are not technical, they must wonder, what the hell is a Global NAP Summit about? Is it like 3rd grade where you have a little, improving the quality of the sleep mats that you have for the afternoon? I hope nobody goes to sleep today. This is not that kind of NAP Summit. And for those of you who haven't voted, please duck out and vote today. Well, what I'm going to try to do this morning is to, I have no slides, but I want to create a mindset for a moment. Now, some of you may remember the Canterbury Tales written back in like 1284 or so. The story there were pilgrims going to Canterbury, and they would meet each other as the roads came together. And in a funny way, I hope that's what we do today. We're kind of pilgrims going to a center, so to speak, a place where, and in this case, the southern part of Virginia, where we would like to create economic opportunity. So in a way, today is like a Canterbury Tale, where we meet and tell each other stories until we get to the center and achieve our objective. I'd like to also suggest a kind of mind-setting exercise. I want you to imagine that in the table before you, there's a water glass. And the question I want you to think about is, how did it get here? And as you start to pull on the threads of that question, you have all kinds of, first of all, physically, how did it get here? It was transported somehow. How was it made? Where was it manufactured? Where did the raw materials come from? What about the design of the device that actually blew the glass to, into the shape that it is? Think about all of the various things that have to have happened for the glass to end up on that table. It doesn't take very long before you've just pulled in the entire world's economy when you explore that question. And so in a way, that's kind of what we want to talk about today, is the infrastructure that's needed and all the other conditions that have to be satisfied in order to ignite economic development. A lot of what we talk about today has to do with technical infrastructure. So things like, wireless communications, 4G, 5G, 6G is coming, edge computing is part of that story. Application control of the underlying network services is another really interesting part of the story. What about Open RAN and Wi-Fi and low Earth orbiting satellites? These are all wireless services that are coloring opportunity for internet use. Then there's the wired infrastructure, which is another major focus of attention for us here. Things like coax and fiber cables, subsea cables, cable landings here in this area in Henrico County. All of those things are additional components that bind the internet together and make it useful. And then there are the networks that ride on top of those underlying transport facilities and the network access points. Google has something like 8,000 peers. And our intent is to try to peer with everybody on the planet if we can. And that's turned out to be a very important part of our internal infrastructure, reaching out to the public internet, and separately the internal networks that connect all of our data centers around the world. But that's not the end of the infrastructure story, because just having fiber and coax and radio connectivity doesn't do much if you don't have any computing capability. So computational resources are absolutely critical to creating the applications that people actually use every day. So we need data centers and we need edge computing capabilities in order to reduce latency and to increase the kind of functional capability to satisfy real-time kinds of interactions, whether that's voice and video communication, which we've all been doing a great deal of for the past 2.5 years, or video games or virtual reality experiences, all of which demand a certain reduction in latency. And so the nearness of the computing resources turns out to be important. Speaking of which, what about all the personal devices that we carry around, our mobiles, our laptops, and what about the IoT devices that are rapidly growing at home? Those too are consumers of the communications capacity and computational resources of the internet. We did a little exercise at Google. A bunch of us said, how many internet-enabled devices do you have at home? And I thought, we might hear 6, 7, maybe 10. Some people went out, including me, with their little Wi-Fi detectors and discovered 30 or 40 devices. And I found 2 temperature sensors in a sock drawer that I had forgotten about. And then the batteries were still working. I was astonished. So you can imagine there are going to be an increasing number of devices at home, and certainly in office settings and in manufacturing plants. I mean, think about advanced manufacturing where large numbers of devices are needed to manage robotic mechanisms and all the other things that go along with manufacturing. So that too will consume a lot of these resources. And then, of course, this whole thing is animated by software, and I'm sure many of you have been watching this open source software activity grow dramatically in many different ways. Microsoft, for example, acquired GitHub not too long ago as one of the major providers of open source software, and there are others like GitLab and SourceForge and so on. This amazing sharing of software by people who just want to know that their software is useful to somebody else. They're not necessarily looking for compensation. Of course, that is a problem, by the way, because the more we rely on open source software, the more important it is that it be maintained. And sometimes it's some guy or some gal who's just doing it in their spare time. And often that leads to software that doesn't get adequate examination for safety and security. And so for those of you who are excited about it's free, should also pay close attention to the software itself before you actually use it to make sure that it's actually gotten adequate attention for safety and security or privacy protection and the like, or resistance to various kinds of attack. So in spite of that risk factor, open source has been a major driver, and so have standards. Vinay mentioned circuit switching and packet switching. The standards create interoperability. Some people will tell you standards interfere with the ability to create new things, and while that can sometimes be true if a standard is overly complex, most standards enable interoperability, which allows for competition. It creates common platforms that people can build on top of, just like Tim Berners-Lee built HTTP on top of TCP/IP, and by doing that, was able to essentially spread the World Wide Web instantaneously wherever the internet happened to go, and he did that on purpose. So there are standards organizations run by IEEE, the Internet Engineering Task Force, the International Telecommunication Union, the American National Standards Institute, the International Standards Organization, 3GPP, the list goes on. Lots of places contribute to open standards, and they are very important for us. And then we get to some real fundamental stuff. How about electrical power? None of this stuff works without it. And I can't overemphasize how important that is. I was in San Diego a few years ago at a Marconi Society meeting. We were talking about communications, of course, and radio. And then I made an offhand remark. You do realize, of course, that we're very dependent on electrical power for all of this stuff. About 2 hours later, all the power went out in San Diego for 2 days. And I got an email after the power came back up from somebody who had been at the symposium saying, you didn't have to do that to make the point. I just wanted you to know I could do that. So electrical power is important to what we do, and we need diverse and resilient electrical power. So that's important when we start thinking about what conditions must be met for us to be successful in igniting economic development here in the southern part of the state. We also need to be able to keep the data centers cool. You've noticed, I suspect, that some of the chipsets that are being used in data centers now are consuming kilowatts of power on a single board. That generates a fair amount of heat. I proposed that we put pizza ovens in the top part of the racks, but they said, even if that worked, the cheese drips down into the circuit boards and it doesn't work. So they rejected my clever idea. We also need towers for radio-based, land-based communication. So these are all physical, technical infrastructure requirements that have to be met. But I want you to back away from the technical part for a moment and give thought to a much broader infrastructure that has to be in place. I want you to imagine for a moment that we're intellectual explorers like Lewis and Clark, and we're exploring this landscape of concepts that are important to economic development. And those broader concepts include things like digital inclusion. How do we make sure that everyone has access to the resources that we're trying to create? How do we make sure that those resources achieve safety, security, and reliability goals, and accessibility, usability, and privacy? We have to do that. We have to do that because if we don't, people won't feel comfortable and safe and won't be comfortable and safe using these resources on a daily basis. So we have to make sure that it really does produce the outcomes that we want to promise. We want things to be maintainable. So if it runs on software, whatever it is, it better be updatable, because for sure, from time to time, you'll find a bug that needs to be fixed. We need a reliable, safe, and secure way to do the updates. And then you might actually want to add functionality, just like my Tesla every once in a while says, guess what I can do today that I couldn't do yesterday? And my first reaction is, please tell me you can still do all the stuff I was relying on yesterday while you're all excited about this other stuff. Now, every one of you presumably has one or more mobiles on your person or in your purses or pocket. I want you to give some thought for just a second to how dependent you have become on those devices. When they don't work for some reason, battery's dead, didn't get a signal, weren't allowed to use the mobile in the environment that you happen to be in, suddenly you get cascade failure effects. Like I couldn't get logged into my account to get the email that I needed in order to make my company successful. So I want you to think a little bit about how dependent we have become and how important dependency analysis is in making sure that we have resilient systems, as opposed to persuading everyone in the country that you should rely on these things only to discover that it is hazardous to their safety and security if they don't work. So this is a big deal. We really need to do better. We need an educated workforce. The point's already been made earlier this morning, but I can't overemphasize how important it is. If you don't know how to use this stuff, if you don't know how to build it and maintain it and operate it, then it's not going to do you any good, no matter what infrastructure you put in place. So education counts, and I'm really glad to hear about the investments that are being made here in Henrico County for education. We also need to make sure, given the 2.5 years of our experience with the pandemic, that both in-person and online educational resources are available. In addition to which, I'm just checking to make sure that you can holler at me, Vinay, when where's Vinay? There you are. You can scream at me when I run out of time. I think we want to make sure that we have a variety of ways for people to learn new things. If you imagine that today a child has already been born who will live to 120, then you can think for a minute about what a long career means and how much you're going to have to learn to stay relevant over such a long period. You might have an 80 or 90-year working career. You're going to have to learn some new things to be useful over that period of time. So lifelong learning turns out to be really important. It also helps if capital is available, and I think many people in this room recognize that without capital it's really hard to build businesses. We also need regulatory frameworks that encourage competition, that encourage investment, that encourage safety and security and privacy. All of those things are important. By the way, when people come to work here, they better have a place to live, so housing turns out to be important. And all the other things that go with it, transportation, food sources, water, sewer systems, all those things that make living worthwhile in a place like this. Then we turn to one other very important aspect of all this, which is the economic potential that these technologies and these facilities can accommodate. And so the internet exchange points and the data center services are opportunities to create not only platforms where new businesses can be built on top of and attract more people to come and work here, but also facilitate jobs in and of themselves. I'm convinced, by the way, that many small and medium-sized businesses in this area and elsewhere will benefit from the growth of infrastructure and people who know how to use it and can help others learn how to use it. A lot of small businesses don't have the expertise. They don't have an IT department. They don't have someone to help them understand how to build websites that are attractive and useful to people, how to deliver products and services. In fact, let me tell you a story. Imagine a company, I'll call it Acronym. This company, Acronym, provides products and services online. You know, you can order things online, it gets delivered online. And I want you to think about all the information that naturally arises from being in that business. The orders get placed, and so you know who is ordering, you know where they want the product to be shipped, so you know about location, you know when the things were ordered. I mean, this is all the normal, just in the normal course of placing an order online. They know which warehouses have the product. They know, so they know so they can choose which warehouse to send the product from. They know when it was delivered, so they know about delays, if there were any, or how efficiently the delivery process was done. This all comes in the normal course of using these online services to run the business. You know something and can learn something about seasonal demand. You learn something about geopolitical variations in product interest. You can track the increasing or declining interest in particular products and services. You may actually be able to ascertain demographic variations in demand for products and services. You can keep track of the inventory, how much do you have and where is it. You can make choices about pricing and quoting of prices and the like. All of this naturally derives from the data that you collect from running the business online. And I don't think we entirely appreciate how powerful it is to have that kind of data available. So the question is, can most businesses take advantage of this naturally generated data in order to improve their own business, their efficiency, and customer service? And I just believe that the answer is yes. So one other possible thing that we might want to consider. Once you have these things in place, continuous monitoring becomes possible and extremely valuable. Think about just keeping track of usage of power, usage of water, which is becoming important in some parts of it, not so much here as it is in California, where I just came back from. What about health management? Continuous monitoring means we can establish a baseline for what's normal for you. So if you or your body decides to go away from the baseline, we can detect that and warn you. What about being able to measure and help you configure your Wi-Fi at home? I suspect some of you, including me, would like some help with that, because after you get done measuring the quality of service you get from the ISP and you compare that with what you're actually getting at home, it's often not the ISP's fault. It's the crappy Wi-Fi that you didn't configure very well. Most folks could use some help with that. Another possibility. There are all kinds of questions about measurements that should be taken on a continuous basis for internet access so we can figure out how well we're doing. Are we improving the quality of service for people who are needing and relying on internet access or not? And the $42 billion that NTIA and the FCC are going to spend really need to be able to establish tracking of quality of service so that we know that the money is going to places that need it the most. Well, I just have a couple of other things, if there's time, to mention to you, because these are lessons from the pandemic. And I think we should take away a bunch of them. The first one is that not all work can be done remotely. Some people's jobs really require proximity. But it's surprising how much work could actually be done successfully and remotely. Most businesses did not believe that until living through the pandemic and discovering that it is possible to work remotely. It's not necessarily the most fun arrangement, and so for some people, it doesn't work very well, not because of the job requiring proximity, but maybe the quality of internet service at home was inadequate. Maybe you didn't have a place to work quietly and close the door, or how do you deal with the fact that the kids are trying to do their schoolwork and you're trying to do your work and you're conflicted over the available equipment or available internet access or just home setting, where, you know, how do you keep people properly installed in spaces where they can work. We also discovered that the supply chain is fragmented very, very quickly because of this proximity problem, and that implied that we need to work harder on making the supply chains more resilient than they have been in the past. Another thing that we learned from the pandemic is that being online and being able to use the internet led to rapid vaccine development, because people were trading DNA information and other kinds of things that led to the various vaccines that have been produced. This also was an opportunity to facilitate the delivery of vaccines. A lot of people were able to essentially schedule vaccinations online in order to do that in an effective and efficient way. And finally, I would say over time that we have the possibility of accumulating data, which is vital to public policy decision-making and public health recommendations, among other things. And the ability to gather all that data and make it more effective and more useful for policymaking is also an important side effect. And that's part of the point of today's meeting, which is to help inform public policy in this region so that the decisions that get made will induce the economic development that we would like. And so we need to think carefully throughout the day of what conditions need to obtain in order for success to be reached. And by the end of the day, I hope we will have learned a few lessons about things we should do in order to achieve that objective. So I'll stop there and thank you all very much for your attention. I look forward to spending the day with you.